real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of the Meet the Parents podcast and another half an hour of parenting chat from some of your favourite bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and tonight I'm joined by Hannah from Budding Smiles and Vicky from Verily Victoria Vocalisers. Good evening, ladies.
Hello!
So on this week's podcast, we're going to try something a little bit different by comparing our kids' lives today to our own memories and experiences of childhood. So I read a post a couple of weeks ago by Donna, who blogs over at What the Redhead Said, where she compared childhood now to what it was like 50 years ago. It was a lovely post. It's well worth a read if you have the chance, and I'll stick a link in the show notes. But it really came back to me when I took the kids to the cinema last week to see the Lego Batman movie. It really struck me how much the cinema-going experience has changed in the nearly 40 years since I first went to the movies. So here are some of the things that occurred to me that are obviously different. So firstly, the cinemas themselves. Our local cinema, like many others, used to have 3 screens, 2 smaller ones and one huge kind of theatre-style one, which could house probably 700-800 people, if not more. And nowadays we're much more accustomed to multiplexes, which might have 10 screens but will only seat 100 to 150 people maximum. It's now a more intimate rather than a grand experience. And secondly, buying tickets. So when a big film came out, the queue outside the cinema would start, probably an hour or more before the programme started, and it would stretch around the block. There was no online pre-booking of seats. You turned up, you queued, you sat wherever you could find a seat, aided by an usherette with a torch. And the seats were tiny and cramped too, much more like sitting in economy on a plane than the kind of seats that we tend to get now in most modern cinemas. And can you imagine queuing for that long now for anything? People start to grumble if they have to queue more than 2 minutes for their popcorn at the concession stand. Thirdly, intermissions. Remember them? With some modern films, it feels like the ads and trailers last longer than the films themselves. Now, when I was a kid, many films still had intermissions where we would stretch our legs, race to the toilets, or queue up to buy a tub of ice cream or a choc ice from another usherette with a tray. And the last film I went to with an intermission, I was racking my brains about this earlier today, was probably Steven Spielberg's Empire of the Sun in 1987. That was a hefty 2.5 hours plus, and starring a young Christian Bale, long before he took on the role of Batman himself, which brings me full circle back to me and the kids watching Lego Batman. So anyway, those are some of my memories. But Vicky, is Grace much of a moviegoer?
She certainly is, yes. And I have to just come back to you with the intermission thing. I remember my last intermission film. It was Born on the 4th of July in 1989. There you go. Grace is definitely a moviegoer. She loves it. And she started going to the cinema when she was 3. She actually sat through a whole pantomime at the age of 1.
Wow.
So goodness knows how she did that. But she's one of those kids who... She's wrapped up in entertainment and creativity, so she's got a good concentration span. And her first film was Toy Story 3 in 2010 when she was 3. Yeah.
And that's amazing because it took us longer to start taking the kids to the cinema, because the boys in particular just didn't have the patience to sit through a film even at home. Never mind at the cinema. But what about you? Can you remember how old you were when you first went to the cinema and what your first film was?
I was racking my brains on this, and I'm pretty certain it was the first Star Wars film in 1977, 78. We went, and it was this real big deal because we went up to London to see it in the West End. So my mum went off shopping, and then me, my sister and my brother all got taken into the cinema by my father. I remember it was an afternoon performance and the cinema was quite empty, and we sat on the balcony, and my brother, who never sits still for anything, was sitting on the balcony with his hand in his mouth the whole film, just watching. So that's what I really remember.
Yeah, and I think probably the first film I ever saw in the West End would probably have been Empire Strikes Back. Any particular reflections on how things have changed with cinemas and films in the years since you were Grace's age?
I have to say, I do think that the main thing that has changed is being able to obviously book online, choose your seats, and then of course you've got the decent seats or the lesser seats. I have to say though, I just think they charge an absolute arm and a leg for things like popcorn and snacks. There is no way I'm paying £2.50 for a bottle of water. I'm sorry. I just take a bottle of water in my bag, thanks very much. I just think things like that, they've just taken advantage of it. And I think it's a shame because I still look at cinema going as a really major experience. I love going and seeing things on the big screen, especially if it benefits the film. And as a result of that, I just think they should just be a bit more careful about how they market things. You know, Grace loves going to the cinema with us. She always has done. And the only thing that really winds Ross up, as you mentioned, is the adverts and trailers at the beginning, which seem to go on forever. I love it. I think it's part of the experience.
Hannah, how about you? Can you remember how old you were when you first went to the cinema? And can you also remember what your first film was?
I actually can't, and this is really terrible, but genuinely, my memory is absolutely horrific. I can remember that the first film I went to see on my own with friends was The Beach, which I think was somewhere around the year 2000, so I was about 14. It was a 15 movie, so we all felt exceedingly naughty going into a 15 movie when we were barely 13, 14 years old. And that was a huge experience. And I don't think we weren't massive cinema goers when I was young. I know we definitely did go, but it didn't feel like a huge part of my young childhood, whereas it was certainly more a part of my teenage years, going with my friends and sort of saving up pocket money, which I guess kids nowadays need to save up considerably more pocket money than I had to sort of 15 years ago.
I think my experience is quite similar to yours in that when I was younger, going to the cinema was something that we did, maybe once a year, and it was, and then it became a huge event, and it was only when I hit my teens and I was able to start going on my own that it became a much more regular thing for me. And I can remember as well what it felt like that first time you sneak into a 15 film and the first time you get into an 18 film. I cannot for the life of me remember what those would have been, but those are quite big milestones, aren't they, in a teenager's life?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I can tell you my first 18 was probably Nightmare on Elm Street, actually.
Good one.
Something like that. It was probably number 3, not the first one. I saw that at home.
And has Toby been to the cinema yet, Hannah?
He has, yes. Actually, Martha has been more than Toby has, but I took them both down to London for a preview screening of Finding Dory last summer, which was interesting. Yeah, interesting is the word I will choose, because it was just a really inconvenient time and it just fell over Toby's nap time and he ended up on the floor right by my feet crying because he was so tired, but he wanted to see the film, but he wanted to go out. And so then I had to hand Martha, it was a few bloggers there, so I had to hand Martha over to Amy from Everything Mummy, and so then Martha wasn't happy because it wasn't me holding her, and in the end I just kind of had one under each arm dragging them out of the screening.
Yeah, for us, Isaac was 5 when he first went to the cinema, and he absolutely did not have the patience to sit through a film at home then, as I've said before, let alone sit through a film in the cinema. Now, Toby and Cara were younger, they were 3, and Cara in particular has real film stamina. She can watch films all day, whereas Toby has only just now grown out of the habit of needing the toilet exactly 10 minutes before the end of every film we watch. And I guess thinking back to my childhood, as for me, I was probably quite a late starter, I guess. I had just turned 8 the first time my parents took me to the cinema to see Grease, and I remember loving the whole experience. And I don't know if that directly influenced me, but I've always had a thing for musical films ever since. Certainly all the way through my teen and university years, I would often spend weekends and holidays sat in the dark theatre, in front of a flickering big screen, whereas since the kids were born, I hardly ever go anymore, sadly. And since Isaac was born, the only non-animated films I've seen in the cinema are the 3 most recent Bond films. Although I guess these days, again, this is one of the big differences, isn't it? Now you only typically have to wait 3 months for films to come out on DVD, so it's not such a big wait. And I can remember in the past that it could easily be 2-3 years, if not more, before a big film was finally released on videotape. So I guess in many ways there's a bit less incentive to go to the cinema than there used to be.
It's a shame, actually.
Yeah, it is.
It is, because it is such an event, and you forget as a child almost just how big everything is.
I mean, some films really lend themselves to the big screen as well, don't they? They're just huge things where you know, the only way to really appreciate it is by seeing it at the cinema.
So let's talk a bit about kids' TV. Now, I'm going to kick off again, and I'll start by sticking with the subject of Batman. So if you've seen the Lego Batman movie, you'll know that there are lots of references to both the previous live-action films and the somewhat more light-hearted 1960s US TV shows. So after taking the kids to see the film, we came home, and me being the nostalgist that I am, I immediately dug out the old TV version on Amazon and introduced the kids to it. Now, given that they're suckers for stuff that's loud and colourful and has plenty of slapstick humour in it, not surprisingly they were quite taken by it. So guess what the next DVD box set I'm going to buy is going to be. Anyhow, I mean, it really did bring back a lot of memories for me. Now, it's got me reminiscing about the children's TV programmes of my youth in an era when there was no CBeebies, no CBBC, no CITV, no Cartoon Network, no Nick Jr., and all the other various kids' TV channels that there now are. And back then, kids' TV was restricted to a couple of hours in the afternoon before the early evening news, and maybe half an hour or so at lunchtime. I know I used to watch certain programmes like Grange Hill religiously. Hannah, obviously this was a little bit before your time, but Vicky, do you remember did you watch Grange Hill? I mean, do you remember things like the whole storyline where Zammo did drugs, which was really groundbreaking and controversial at the time?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I watched Grange Hill from the very beginning when Tucker used to be in it, and and then they all, you know, carried on graduating, going and moving along. And yeah, I remember the Zammo thing really well. And I loved the song that they did from that, Just Say No. Do you remember that? With the video?
We're not going to sing it, though.
No, I nearly did. And I thought, no, I'm not going to sing it. But yeah, I remember it. And it was really groundbreaking and very controversial. And I think it actually, you don't really get that in the same way as you used to, because of the way it was portrayed and the fact that it was on at such a specific time on a specific channel. And you can't, you know, you didn't have any other kids' channels. You had BBC and ITV, and that was your lot. So yeah, I think it made more people aware because of the fact that it was more concentrated, a more concentrated audience.
It's like when you grow up, it's like the kind of the water cooler moments you have over, you know, kind of big things that happen in big shows that don't happen quite so much now because the audience is so much more fragmented and diluted, and we don't necessarily watch programmes live, but we watch them at different times. And part of the reason it was so groundbreaking and so hard-hitting was it was that time when, as a kid coming home from school, pretty much everyone I knew came back and watched Grange Hill, and we'd have all watched it in the afternoon. We'd have all gone into school the following morning, and it was all we talked about. Whereas stuff my kids watch, there is, you know, they've got 30, 40, 50 channels to choose from that are on, you know, anywhere between 12 and 24 hours a day. So they're watching completely different things to their friends at different times, and you don't have necessarily that same kind of common conversation about as many programmes as we did when we were kids.
Yeah.
Can you remember what any of your other favourite programmes were while you were growing up?
Yeah, there were quite a few actually, and I mean, my first real favourite programme from when I was really little was the Magic Roundabout, and I used to cry when it finished, so my mum had to look after me. So that's me way back when. But then as I went to school, I'd come home. The first thing we do is get a cup of tea and a cake and watch kids' TV until it ended at 20 to 6 when the news was about to come on, and that was when you did your homework. I remember watching Nightmare. That was one of our favourites. In actual fact, it's been repeated on one of the Gold channels recently, and Grace loves it. So yeah, we've been watching it, all the reruns all over again. What else? I used to watch loads of different things, and Blue Peter, that was a real favourite of mine for quite a long time. Grange Hill, as we've already discussed, that was probably my favourite of all of them. Yeah, I think it's funny enough, I was watching an 80s programme recently where they said that there was one specific programme that had a huge audience. And that is, like you said, because people watch stuff on catch-up now. You can't, you know, then it was very rare to even have a video player to be able to record it on. So everybody watched everything at the same time. And so that, I don't think we'll ever see again a mass audience like we did back in the 80s.
And that's evidenced in the continuing decline in TV viewing figures. Hannah, what about you? I mean, sadly, your frame of reference is a little bit later than mine and Vicky's. Did you watch much children's TV, and can you remember what your favourite programmes were? I guess at an earlier age, and then as you gradually grew up.
Yeah, I actually loved The Magic Roundabout, but I watched it at my nan and granddad's house, so that was always just the programme that we watched there on VHS. At home, we watched a lot of Looney Tunes stuff, a lot of Disney as well. And then as I sort of grew up, going through the 90s, there was things like, I think it was called Captain Planet and Power Rangers, and so I liked a lot of that stuff as well. But Looney Tunes, Andy Pandy. So there was quite a lot of stuff that really sticks out that my mum had on VHS.
So quite a lot of old school stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know if my mum just had these things on video, for years before we came along, or what really. I can remember things like Nickelodeon starting up, and as I sort of migrated towards my tweens and teens, there were more American shows coming in, things like Saved by the Bell and that sort of stuff. And so those sort of things, Sabrina the Teenage Witch and things like that, started creeping in.
Oh my God, I think I must have been in my mid-20s when that was on. And it's funny you mentioned Power Rangers, because of course that's being remade, isn't it, as a film. Saw the trailer for it in the cinema, not going anywhere near it. What kind of stuff does Toby watch, and has Martha started to be drawn into anything that she sees on screen yet?
Toby goes through phases. He tends to get really, really into something, and then a couple of weeks later it's like it never existed and he's moved on to the next thing. He absolutely loves his films now. Ever since Dory, ever since the cinema episode, he's gone through phases with films that we've then watched at home. TV-wise, his first ever thing that he absolutely loved was Something Special with Justin, because I think we were teaching him to sign from a very young age, so Something Special was fantastic and he could really relate to it, and it taught him even more signs that I didn't know, and I had to keep watching it to keep up with what he was learning, so that was really good. Nowadays it's Blaze. Everything is about Blaze with Toby at the moment. Martha doesn't seem that fussed. Sometimes the TV will catch her eye and she'll sort of be in her walker and she'll have a little wander over there and look at it for a couple of minutes, but she doesn't seem that bothered. She's such a people person.
I can remember watching loads of kids' TV after school when I was younger. I mean, like we were saying, there was a very specific slot, and it was just what everyone did. We've talked about Grange Hill, we mentioned Blue Peter as well previously, but I can also vividly remember that in that slot between when children's programmes used to finish at 20 to 6 and dinner time, in effect, for us, I can remember that they used to show some of the classic old silent movie stars and talkies on BBC Two, which filled in the gap before dinner time. So things like Laurel and Hardy and Harold Lloyd and things like that, which I still love to this day. But
I loved Harold Lloyd. He was brilliant.
Going back to kids' programmes, I mean, I didn't have to rack my brains too hard while preparing for this podcast, and I kind of jotted down at random a massive list of shows that I remember that used to be on either, some of them in that lunchtime slot or in the after school slot. So things like Blue Peter we mentioned, but there was also the ITV equivalent Magpie, Ivor the Engine, Captain Pugwash, Willow the Wisp, Rhubarb and Custard, The Perishers, Dogtanian and the Three Muskehounds, Battle of the Planets, Chorlton and the Wheelies, Button Moon, Trumpton, Camberwick Green and Chigley, Bagpuss, The Clangers, Fingerbobs, Bod, Danger Mouse, Scooby-Doo, and actually just talking about them brings back so many memories, and of course some of these programmes have made a comeback in recent years, haven't they? In particular, I really love the new Danger Mouse, and that's something that the kids and I have really kind of bonded over. We've watched it together. They love it as much as I do, and it's even provided the springboard for me to introduce them to the original cartoons, so that as voiced by David Jason and the late great Terry Scott, and it's always lovely to be able to share some of those kind of quite treasured memories from my childhood with them. And the same goes for the new Thunderbirds, which again, that's opened the door for us to watch the old shows there as well, and it's really surprised me.
I have to say, I just need to add to your list Mr. Ben and the Banana Splits, because I love both of those.
And the banana splits always used to be on during school holidays, didn't they?
Oh yeah, every day. It was brilliant. I loved the music. I used to go around singing it all the time. But I'm not going to do it now.
Hannah, would you say that kids' TV is much different today compared to how it was when you were a kid?
I guess it's the accessibility more than anything. I mean, I can distinctly remember the first time we got Sky, for example, and it just was this mind-blowing. It was just like absolutely insane that we had that technology. Whereas now, with like Netflix and the internet generally, everything is just there as and when they want it. And I think that's probably, for me, that's the biggest shift. Toby could come in and say, Mummy, I want to watch Blaze. And if it's all, if I'm happy for him to stick it on, all I have to do is go onto Netflix on the smart TV. And there it is in front of him. And that's just completely different from, my childhood, where if you wanted to watch something, well, you flipping well had to wait until it was actually on the telly, or you had it on VHS.
Yeah, they're much more used to having things just there on demand now, aren't they?
Yeah.
How about you, Vicky? I mean, how else would you say things are different compared to when we were kids?
I just think the quality of some programmes isn't thought through like it used to be. And there's so many American programmes on, that actually what's happening is a lot of our children are picking up the Americanisms, which, I mean, the word like enters some sentences at least 10 times with some of the children I know. we hammer it out of grace, but it just winds me up, the amount of that's filtering through. I just think the quality, because there's so much of it, I think the quality has been diluted, and I think that's a shame.
There's a lot of good stuff about modern children's TV. It's definitely much more culturally diverse and politically correct than it used to be, which on the whole is no bad thing. But we've also lost some of that. I think some of the kind of the fun and the silliness and the kind of the anarchic elements that were kind of buried deep within in programs. And one of the things I like about the new Danger Mouse is actually they've retained a lot of that kind of silliness and the adult humour. I mean, we were talking about the Magic Roundabout earlier, which is littered with all kinds of hidden meanings that none of us found out about until our teens. They don't really make TV like that anymore. There's always a very strong educational element to things, which again, no bad thing. So I guess let me just close this section with a little footnote. So I was thinking about this, and it almost seems now like they've been around forever, because they've certainly been around for all the time that I've been a parent. But CBeebies and CBBC are still relatively young. In fact, they launched 15 years ago this month, February 2002, which actually isn't that long at all. And sometimes I wonder how we ever lived without them. And yet it seems we got on okay. So finally this week, one of the classic mobile phones of the pre-smartphone era, the Nokia 3310, for those who are interested in this sort of thing, it's supposed to be making a comeback. So first launched in 2000, this kind of little mini brick sold 126 million units worldwide. It could go more than a week between charges, and it came with one of the most iconic and addictive games ever, Snake. And it's funny to think how ubiquitous they are today, but mobiles in anywhere approximating the form we know them today have only really been around for 20 years at most. Watch a film from the mid to late 1980s and it really dates them, because characters were either still using payphones to make calls, or they were lugging around handsets that were the size of a gold bar and about as heavy as well. So Hannah, as the babe in arms amongst us, can you remember when you got your first mobile, and can you remember what it was?
I think it must have been around the year 2000. I can distinctly remember the 3310 coming out, and I did have one, but I do think that prior to that I had a Bosch orange phone. It was like a sort of transparent, luminous orange handset with a sticky out antenna. And I can distinctly remember having that and thinking I was the bee's knees for having it. So yeah, we must be talking sort of around the year 2000. So I was, again, about that sort of 14, 13.
Do you still have it?
No, unfortunately not. I really, really wish that I did. We have got a really old Nokia in our clutter drawer somewhere, which was one of Phil's. I don't know if it was his very first one, but we do have an old brick mobile of Phil's from back in the day.
I'll come on to my phone history in a minute, but I have kept every mobile phone that I've ever owned, and I'm looking forward one day to pulling them out of a drawer and showing the kids just how antiquated these things now look. Vicky, what about you? Can you remember getting your first mobile?
Yes, I can. It was in 1994, believe it or not.
Early adopter.
Early. That was because I lived on my own at the time. I just split up with the person I was with, and I was driving quite a long way to work, and I thought, right, I'm going to treat myself to a mobile phone. It was a Sony CMH33 and it's also known as a Sony Mars bar phone.
Yes, I remember it. I remember that.
Oh my goodness, I absolutely thought it was the best thing ever. It was brilliant. And funny enough, the number's still in existence. It's my ex who's got that now. But I felt so grown up. I was 23 at the time. And I was driving to and from Basingstoke, which was quite a long way from where I lived. And I thought, if I break down, I'm on my own. What am I going to do? And I lived on my own. So I thought, if I have a phone, at least then I can get hold of somebody. So that was the main reason for getting it, really.
Yeah, did it have a big impact on your life? How big a difference did it make?
To start with, it didn't make a huge difference because I didn't want to use it religiously because obviously you had to pay every time you used it. It was in the days before contracts where you got free phone calls and free texts and all the rest of it. So every time you rang, and I think I had a certain budget each month. But I'd ring it to speak to my mum. Sometimes it was in the days where you could use your phone when you were driving, you know. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I'd ring my mum when I was on the way back home going, hi, blah, 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 and just tell her about my day. So, yeah, it didn't change my life massively because I didn't use it to any great big extent, but it did certainly make a difference.
And that's interesting. I mean, it's a really good point that you raised, that actually when we first started using mobile phones, it wasn't something where we had our phones out all the time because there was no Facebook to check, or there was no Twitter to update, there was no Instagram to post photos on, and in those early days, mobiles were things that we only used when we needed to use them, rather than because we actively had anything, specific that we wanted to do with them. And now I remember I got my first mobile phone, which was a clunky Motorola that was so old that it still had a pull-out antenna, and that was probably about 97 or 98, and that was followed a couple of years later by a Nokia 8110, which was the phone with the sliding cover that was made famous by The Matrix, and that was just the coolest phone ever. I had another Nokia. Yes, I wasted God knows how many hours of my life playing Snake in those pre-mobile internet days. Then I had a Samsung in between, and then I bought my first iPhone, which would have been a 3G in 2008, I think. But now mobiles are almost disposable, aren't they? I change my phone every 2 years, and it's amazing what they can do. It combines all the functions of multiple gadgets that, in my youth would have cost thousands of pounds and required a heavy-duty rucksack to cart around. I mean, if you think about it, a modern phone has the functionality of, Sony Walkman, a camera, a camcorder, an address book, a diary, a notepad, a typewriter. It has more processing power than computers that I had, even 10, 15 years ago. They even allow us to make telephone calls sometimes. Battery life's rubbish, though. What about the pre-mobile phone days, when a phone was something that was physically wired into the wall? Most families only had one in the house, and it would have had a rotary dialing mechanism whereby you actually physically dialed a number. Vicky, have you got any particular childhood memories of using a landline phone?
Oh, yeah. Whenever I got asked to answer the phone by my mum, I felt so grown up. When I was really small, as you walked in the front door, on the right-hand side, there was our stairs, and next to the stairs, there was the phone. And if you wanted to talk on the phone, you'd sit on the stairs. And it was one of those rotary ones. And I can still remember my first ever phone number from when I was small. And then, as I got older, when I was in my teens, it was in the days where you'd see all your friends at school, but then you'd have to come home and talk to them on the phone as well. So I'd, come in from school, be done with watching my programmes, and then say, Mum, is it okay if I use the phone? And it would be, who are you ringing? I'd say something like, Sarah. We've just seen her at school. I know, but we need to talk. And then I'd spend another half an hour to an hour on the phone. So, that's the memories I have of the phone. And, of course, you used to answer it as well by saying your number. Yes,
you did, didn't you?
Yeah, you'd say your number. In fact, one of Ross's relatives, when we ring her, she's an older lady, she still does that.
My granddad does as well.
Back in the day, I used to I would memorise. I would know, I guess probably maybe the 10 or 15 numbers that I use most often. My best friends, your family and so on. Whereas now, I can barely remember my own mobile number, let alone anyone else's. In fact, I probably only know about 3 numbers. I probably know 4 numbers. I know my mobile, I know Heather's mobile, I know our house phone number, and I know my parents, and that's it. Because nowadays you just don't need to, do you? Hannah, what about you? You must have been just about old enough, I guess, to be familiar with what it was like to have a phone that was actually chained and plugged into a wall.
Yeah, I actually have always hated speaking on the phone, to the point where I would avoid it at all possible costs as a youngster. And I think mainly the main use for phones was birthdays and Christmases, phoning relatives to say thank you for presents and cards and the such. And I was okay with that, but I never liked picking up the phone. And so when caller display came in, that was just amazing for me, because I don't know why I was so nervous about who might be on the other end, but I hated it. And it wasn't actually my first job, but when I got a job in a call centre, my mum just burst out laughing when I told her I'd got it, because I hated speaking on the phone. But I was kind of lucky in a way, because by the time I was reaching the sort of age where I wanted to be chatting to my friends all the time, that's when mobiles came in. So I kind of managed to avoid the whole landline thing to a big extent, really. And even now, we don't actually have a landline ourselves, but my parents, my grandparents, both sets of grandparents have all actually got the same landline numbers that they had when I was a kid. So I do know those off by heart, because I've just been dialing them forever, really.
And it's funny how much our experiences have changed over the years, isn't it? And, these days we take it for granted that we can take a call anywhere, whether it's indoors, outdoors, in our local coffee shop, anywhere really. And even if you're using a landline, most of us now have cordless phones, which means you can take it off anywhere in the house rather than being chained to the hallway or the living room or wherever your phone was. And your movement was restricted by how far you could stretch that wound up cord. And I can remember when Heather and I got together at university, whenever we were apart during the holidays, we would take it in turns to phone each other, which meant I spent a lot of time sat in our kitchen, which was where our phone was. And when she was away visiting her dad in Australia, nowadays we'd use Skype or WhatsApp or email or whatever. But back then we didn't have any of that, and international calls cost an absolute fortune. So we used to send each other, airmail letters, which meant our two halves of a conversation would be separated by 5 or 6 days. And that the whole concept of that seems really weird now, doesn't it? The other memory I had from my younger years was when we used to call my parents' families in Malaysia. So, back then, late 70s, early 80s, you still couldn't dial an international number direct. So you had to go via a human telephone operator who would manually connect you via an international exchange to the Malaysian network. And you would then have a conversation with people on the other end of the phone, often with, a 1 or 2 second delay between transmission and receipt over a line that was really crackly, all charged at the rate of approximately, 1 gazillion pounds per minute. And nowadays we call them on Skype from my iPad. And it's a little bit simpler and a little bit cheaper. But anyway, that concludes our stroll down memory lane via childhood close and adolescence avenue. Are things better now than they were then? Yeah, mostly, I'd say. But they're certainly easier and more convenient than they were. But there are times when I guess we all still look back a little wistfully on the good old days. So before we go, what have you guys been up to the past week or so? So, Hannah?
Well, Martha and I just recently got home from 2 days in London, so we're quite exhausted, but we've had a wonderful time. And I'm just taking deliveries of lots and lots of lovely products to start making up some apples and pips hampers for new babies and mums-to-be. So it's a big step for the business that I'm quite frankly terrified of, but very excited.
How about you, Vicky?
To be honest, I've been having a fairly quiet time, just making sure I don't get too tired. My headaches seem to have calmed down a bit, and Ross and I went out for afternoon tea last week as a treat for ourselves to Cricket St Thomas. And then very soon I've got my 20-week scan, and we will be revealing the gender. Watch this space.
We look forward to the gender reveal video. As for us, we've just come out the other side of half term. I took Friday off, and as I've mentioned, we went to see the Lego Batman movie. We had a good day. That's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the three of us online. Hannah?
I'm at Budding Smiles on social media, and my blog is buddingsmiles.co.uk.
And Vicky?
You will find my blog, Verily Victoria Vocalises, at vevivos.com, and I'm on social media at Vic Welton.
And you can find me at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and on social media at ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Do please give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. And if you're an iTunes user, do please visit the Meet the Parents Podcast page and leave a star rating and a review. Unless it's a 1-star rating, in which case, don't bother. But anyway, thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.